What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel and podcast network. He is Andrew Destin. I am Noah Hiles. Andrew, it's been a minute, my friend. How are you?
Doing well, man. This is so overdue. I was thinking about that before we started recording. Like, it has been at least a month, if not more, since we've done one of these, and we're overdue for it. I'm doing well, man. Doing well yourself, or?
I'm doing great. I mean, we act like we don't talk every day anyway, but the people don't know that. We could be anywhere. I don't even know Andrew Destin in the
We got
offseason.
to catch them up. We got to let
Right.
them
Yes.
know it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been, what has it been? 2 months now, 2 months plus since the Pirates last played a baseball game. If you weren't paying attention, the Dodgers won the World Series. The Yankees lost the World Series. And some offseason moves were made. Not a ton so far from the Pirates. A lot more on the front office side of things and the personnel side of things. But that could change soon because on Monday in Dallas, Texas, the 2024 Major League Baseball winter meetings will take place. Andrew and myself will both be there in attendance. We'll have you covered. A lot of interesting storylines, I think, as far as the Pirates are concerned. Again, they're probably not going to be in the Soto sweepstakes. And I wouldn't expect maybe a huge free agency move there, but I think there's a lot of information that can come from these meetings, Andrew. Just looking at the front office shuffling that's taken place over the last couple of months. There's a lot of internal questions related to their current roster. And there's also the external developments. Like eventually they will sign someone. Eventually they will make a trade. And it's going to be fun to try to dig up what their plans are for all of these things. So we're going to get right into it. I wrote an off-season preview that you can read at post-gazette.com that kind of goes along with this show, but we're going to expand upon what I wrote about here. So off-season recap, Andrew. I'm just going to go through the main moves that were made for people who might not have been paying as close to attention as others. The first big one was Max Kwan being hired as the director of international scouting. Kevin Tannenbaum was hired from Cleveland to be the vice president of research and development. John Baker, the farm director, was promoted to overseeing the performance team. That's a role that's open, is the farm director role. Will Lawton was moved out of his the coordinator of pro scouting role. So I believe that's still an opening as well. Those are two pretty big openings in the front office. As far as the coaching staff is concerned, Matt Haig was hired to be the hitting coach. Brett Strom, who we talked to earlier this week, was hired to be an assistant pitching coach. They're still looking to fill the bullpen coach opening. And as far as player personnel is concerned, I would say the most notable moves were the non-tenders of Connor Joe, Brian De La Cruz, and Hunter Stratton. So we're not going to dive into all of that, Andrew. I just want to pick, because we're going to get a chance to dig deep on all of these things in Dallas. We're going to get to, meet up with people and kind of find out what went behind some of these things. When I list off everything, what's the most intriguing thing to you that you want to learn more about?
Yeah, I think the one for me is the decision to bring Kevin Tannenbaum in, and frankly, what attracted him to come to Pittsburgh in the first place.
Okay.
That's one to me that I look at as the research and development with this team. I don't think it's a particularly significant secret. I think it's one that's relatively well known. Is that throughout Major League Baseball, I think you'd be hard pressed to say that the Pirates are a leading innovator when it comes to research, development, etc. And they've made strides the last few years with Ben Cherington at the helm as GM, but it's clear that this is a hire that I think is one that the Pirates want to take steps forward in that regard. They're not where they need to be. And I'm curious what exactly it was that brought Tannenbaum, that convinced him this is the opportunity to take up, because this is a guy who's from Cleveland, grew up in the area, was working for a childhood team for the last, I believe it was 7 years, 8 years, something along those lines. What was the motivating factor to leave? You're somebody who went to college out there in Ohio, has spent time covering that team in Cleveland. Like, that is a well-oiled machine.
It is.
With the Guardians.
Yes.
What would inspire you to leave them to go to the Pirates?
And to add upon your point, I mean, he was progressing. It's not like he was just there in a low level. I mean, he worked his way up this was a lateral move for him in a way. I believe this is the same role he had in Cleveland. So that is an interesting question. It's, why would you leave something where there's far more success than Pittsburgh? You're surrounded by, I think, way more proven people. around you, right? Like they've in a way figured it out. No one's ever cracked the code of baseball together. But as far as small market organizations go, you'd be hard pressed to find someone or an organization that gets more out of less than the Guardians. And I think that's interesting. And especially with Cleveland's pitching development with the Pirates, I think that could be a really good hire. So I like that you picked that one. I'm gonna go with Baker.
Yeah.
Just because I will say I'll my runner up would be the Brian De La Cruz non-tender.
Yeah.
Just because, but I get why that move was made. I'm just a little surprised by it
Yeah.
because he had so much control and they just acquired him. It was good. They should have got rid of him. I agree with the move. I'm just saying I'm surprised they did it. But the Baker thing is interesting to me because one, that move came after, right? I mean, they announced some of these openings, like the international scouting director and the R&D director. Those positions were open during the regular season. In the last couple of weeks, Ben mentioned that they were open. Whereas the Baker news just happened a couple weeks ago, right? It was like right before Thanksgiving. So it seemed like that one was a different type of decision. Some people have reported it as it's just a reassignment. From what I've been told, it was a promotion. But that's an interesting thing because, I mean, that's a huge part. We talk about what you mentioned, the R&D has been a problem in this franchise or for this organization. Development has been a huge part of why they maybe aren't as far along in this process as where they would like to be. So the fact that they kept Baker, reassigned him, and now they go into the winter meetings with a very significant opening on their baseball ops team, I think that's worth noting and worth looking into a little bit more.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. I think on the Baker note, and just to quickly circle back on the Brian De La Cruz note too, because I think that's another key point to bring up is just, that in conjunction with Hottie Rod leaving to go to the San Francisco Giants. I know that's something we've written about on the Post-Gazette is how linked those two were, of Rod being, really a lightning rod in the sense of wanting to bring Brian De La Cruz to Pittsburgh. Obviously, both of those guys now gone with the Pirates, but the Baker note is interesting because regardless of how you want to slice it up, it's clear that there needs to be change when it comes to player development. Who is going to be that guy who comes in and, moves it forward? I think it would be fair to say that John Baker is a very personable, forward-thinking, intelligent guy who, as a former player, a relatively recent former player, brought that kind of perspective, which I think will suit him well in this new role. But will they bring in a similar kind of guy to head player development when it comes to being a farm director? Or do they go in the complete inverse direction? I mean, it's an apples and oranges comparison, but bringing in Brent Strom to help out on the pitching side of the major league level, Brent is more than willing and spoke as much about this on Thursday about how he is a guy who's willing to embrace sabermetrics, who's willing to embrace that forward thinking, but he is still an old school guy. Is that what you're looking for in the farm director, or are you looking for it to be an even more innovative, forward thinking person? I think it's an interesting argument because I don't want to say that the team or the franchise has an identity crisis or anything like that. Like, that's too aggressive of putting it. But it is kind of a crossroads of which direction do you want to go, because this model has yielded mixed results in terms of being very, however you want to describe it when it comes to the pitching and the hitting side.
Yeah. So transitioning now, the internal stuff is so interesting to me because it's clear that for one reason or another, they're focused on getting more out of what they already have rather than improving through external acquisitions, right? Just by reassigning guys to different roles, promoting some people internally. And that applies in the front office. That's applied in the coaching realm where we've seen promotions internally there too. And it's also personnel wise. I mean, Cherington's mentioned it. They need to get more out of guys like Hayes, Davis, Sawinski, right? But the internal questions too is, I mean, there's a lot of shuffling of the deck here. So, Andrew, just reviewing some internal storylines with the personnel, curious again to hear which one you want to dig deeper into. I have out here Brian Reynolds at first base, O'Neal Cruz continuing to develop as an outfielder. David Bednar and his role on the team next year. And the injury status of Endy Rodriguez and, of course, Brian Hayes. Which one are you looking to learn more about?
Man, I want to learn about all these, but the place where I feel like I want to start is, and I'm curious your thoughts on this too, because we really haven't discussed this off the podcast either, but with David Bednar. That is not an insignificant move in the sense that they did extend him with, they could have not, let him go.
Non-tendered him, yeah.
Non-tendered him. They could have not extended a qualifying offer, right? And instead, it was a clear move of they trust Bednar. They believe he can get back to the All-Star form. Aroldis Chapman walks in free agency and signs for just a few pennies more with the Boston Red Sox. Easily could have pivoted the inverse direction and said, Aroldis Chapman is our closer. David, thanks, but no thanks. Yep. We're going to move in different directions. There is clear trust in the guy that, yeah, maybe it's a lot to assume that he can become back to our All-Star level, but they're, kind of banking on a lot there. And I think it's not insignificant that Brent Strom and Oscar Marin going right out to visit him here in Pittsburgh, where he's been working out with his brother Will. David has been, basically since the season ended, doing that throwing program and whatnot. So I think that's certainly a huge storyline to keep tabs of is how is David Bednar? Will he be able to return to form next year?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that Strom went out of his way to mention that too, right? Like they want to make it clear that this is a guy that they're invested in, that not just financially, but they're going to depend on him to pitch leverage innings. It's not going to be like in September where they're just bringing him out there in September to, get him through, right? Yeah. Like this is a guy that they're going to depend on. They're going to, pay him more money than they paid him last year, and he's going to have to perform. So that's an interesting one. I think I'll just take the basic one. Reynolds at first base, I think is just the one that, because that's the most significant impact. I mean, you look at it like, I feel like Cruz in the outfield, he looked a lot better than anyone expected him to in the short time that he had to play there.
Yep.
So I think you're right. And so I think it's fair to assume that like that's going to continue to go well. Like I wouldn't expect a huge regression, maybe offensively, because he's learning a new, like normally when you switch a guy to a new full-time position, their offensive production dips a little bit. So maybe there, but like, I don't expect him to just completely look worse than we saw in September. I would expect him to be at that level or better defensively. And then with Endy and Ke'Bryan with their injuries, it's like, what do we really know? Right? I mean, they'll tell us the injuries, but like with Endy, he's a 22-year-old kid, like is eventually going to heal up. And Ke'Bryan, we really won't figure anything out until we see him try to play 162 and see how it goes. But with this Reynolds thing, I mean, first base has been a turnstile since Josh Bell left. Since this regime took over, it's been a new first baseman every offseason. And it's been 1-year deals, and it's been not the best production, quite frankly. And you look at Reynolds, it's such an interesting thing because how often do you hear a player voice interest in changing positions, right? I mean, you've seen other teams move guys. The Padres moved Merrill and Tatis to the outfield. The Phillies moved Harper to first base. That was more out of necessity because he was getting surgery, right? But Reynolds he was an all-star outfielder this past year. And he went on record to say, I want to play first base. I went out of his way to get his own first baseman's mitt and was doing drills. And like he made sure people saw that he had an interest in this. And the coaching staff acknowledged it. The GM has acknowledged it. And it's interesting to me because, I mean, this is a guy that they've made a huge investment in. And it's looked like the best investment so far, with the exception of maybe drafting Paul number 1 overall. Right. But as far as spending money goes, I don't think they've spent better money as a front office than extending Brian Reynolds right now for what they're going to pay him and what they're probably going to get out of him for the remainder of that deal. And what he does best is hit. The defensive metrics have looked worse and worse every single year. And so if you want to allow a guy to continue to do what he does best, which is hit, you put him at a corner infield position, which is typically known as one of your top offensive production spots in the field. Now, again, like I just mentioned with Cruz, there are some people who would argue, typically you see a reduction when there's a position change. But that's the fun in digging into this. Are they going to let him do this? And how often? It's not like he has to permanently be a first baseman. It's not like when they moved Pedro to first base because he had the yips. It's not like when Harper got moved to first base because he had Tommy John. Like, the guy can still play outfield. So is he your backup first baseman? Because if so, that eliminates the need for a platoon because he's a switch hitter. It's just play him at first base when you want to. Or is he your everyday first baseman? Because that changes how you shop the rest of your offseason because you've already let 2 corner outfielders go from non-tendering them. So I just think that the decision behind Reynolds right now is one of the more significant decisions they need to make. And regardless if it's full-time outfield, half and half, full-time first base, it's going to impact how they go about their business moving forward.
Yeah, and not to mention, frankly, the business not just for 2025, but for much beyond that. Because you talk about how good of an investment this has been by the Pirates into Brian Reynolds. It absolutely has been, but the defense has been declining. That offensive contributions that he's provided, it's exceeding the contract that's at first base playing league average defense.
Right.
This can help extend his life as a baseball player a lot longer. It's not, it's clear. Being an outfielder, that takes a wear and tear on your body, especially a guy who started his career in center, was a good center fielder, has declined. This can extend his career in Pittsburgh and make him a productive player later in that contract. I would tend to think probably more so than if he was playing outfield 150 games a year.
And to build off your wear and tear point, I mean, this guy plays pretty much every game already.
Yeah.
And if you can put him in a spot where there's less wear and tear, you can guarantee 160 games of Brian Reynolds for the next 5 seasons. That's pretty good, in my opinion. So I think people can figure out where we stand on this issue. Move him to first. Yeah. But we'll see. And then finally, Andrew, we'll get into the external part of this. This is where, a lot of the people watching are rolling their eyes. Oh, they're not going to do anything. And they might not. They might not. But, I mean, last year at the winter meetings, they acquired Marco Gonzalez. The year prior, they got Vince Velasquez. So, I mean, those aren't the craziest moves, obviously, but it was something, right? They traded for guys who were established big leaguers, and if you look at those moves, those were starting pitching acquisitions, and they needed starting pitching in both those years. They don't need starting pitching now. So if you're going off of that logic, then if they make one trade for an area of need, that should be exciting because the area of need is no longer starting pitching. So it either means it's going to be a position player or a reliever. So let's start there, Andrew. What is the most likely addition? If they were to make a trade for a big league player, what is it going to be? What position?
Yeah, I think it's got to be the bullpen, right? Like, I only say that because 2 things. One, the bullpen market right now for free agents is very closer heavy, which obviously there's a million free agent middle relievers of that nature, but like nobody who's a really impact guy the way that when you look at the Pirates teams that made those postseason runs back in the 2010s, elite bullpens where it wasn't just the closer. It was in the 7th, it was in the 8th, right? Yep. Those are the pieces they need to supplement that right now either aren't on the roster or exist in unproven commodities, right? Guys who are relatively young. I think that's where you can make a move in a trade where it's, hey, a lower level prospect for a reliever or a couple lower level prospects for a couple relievers. I think that's in play. There's a lot of free agent outfielders. You can go get a bat that way. That's probably a more cost-effective way of doing business and less risky than saying, hey, let's go sign, or make a big move for like a guy. Like, obviously they wouldn't trade with the Cardinals. It's highly unlikely. But if you were to go get a guy like a Helsley where he's at an all-time peak value, that just doesn't make sense for the Pirates.
Right.
Go get a couple of middle relief guys in a trade, sign a bat. I feel like a trade for a couple of relievers makes a lot of sense. What about you?
I think you need left-handed pitching.
Yeah.
Anywhere. I mean, you've got how many left-handers on the 40-man roster right now? Bailey Falter, Joey Wentz. Am I missing anyone else?
I think that's it, man.
I think that's it. And I mean, Bailey's a starter, and Joey Wentz, I mean, if that's your top left-handed reliever in your bullpen on opening day, I no offense to Joey Wentz, but you would probably like to have a little bit more of a proven commodity there after having Aroldis Chapman as your top left-handed reliever the year prior. So, I think that they're, like you mentioned, the Pirates have a big commodity right now, which is starting pitching. If you look, I mean, this is like the best, there's like the best time to sell a house, right? This is the best time to be selling starting pitching If you look at the market, what the A's paid for Severino, the A's, and I'm sorry to bring that up, Andrew. But it's not just him. You look at what these other guys are projected to get and just the value. Some teams are going to say, you know what, let's just trade for something that we can develop on our own or something that might be ready to go. You might be able to get a little bit more than typical for a Bailey Falter or a Luis Ortiz, or if you want to go that route, a Braxton Ashcraft, a Mike Burrows, Thomas Harrington, or Hunter Barco. Those guys are probably all right now the most valuable they've been in their big league careers as far as trade pieces. Maybe not Ashcraft because of the injury stuff, sure, but the rest of those guys, I mean, Falter's probably at an all-time high in value. Luis Ortiz absolutely is. Jared Jones is. All of them are because of the market and because of the seasons they're coming off of. And so you look at it, and those are guys that you could flip for a bat, depending. Or if you want to go further down, like you mentioned, Andrew, trade a Drake Fellows or someone in single A, you can get a big league left-handed reliever. That if they're banking on Bednar to be the closer, well, your ninth inning's taken care of. The problem right now is they need to get to the ninth inning. You have Holderman, who's fine, but you need more than just that. Nicholas and all these other guys, Santana, Marietta, who will be back, Majinski. Like you said, it's a lot of unproven or inconsistent. Go get a couple veterans. And there are teams who would definitely trade their seventh inning man for a fifth starter right now. And so that's something the Pirates need to consider doing, or trade their seventh inning man for a fifth starter for their team down the line, I should say. Yeah. So that's what I would look at. Get some left-handed pitching for your bullpen. That will be the easiest move to be made, I think. Andrew, most likely trade partner. Who do you think they're going to cut a deal with?
Oh, it's interesting. I was kind of mulling this over before we started the podcast, and I think there's a lot of ways you could go about this, right? Like, they're not going to stay within the division. I don't think so. I know that there's kind of a proclivity there from Ben Cherington to go to the American League because that's where he's got a lot of familiarity. He's made trades with the Blue Jays. They've gotten a lot of guys with Red Sox ties, just given his link to there. I don't know. I mean, the Blue Jays is one that screams to my mind, not necessarily because there's an obvious player that jumps out to me. And no, I'm not saying Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but, it's documented they did that last year at the deadline. And the Blue Jays, I think, to me, are a team that's fascinating because depending on what happens in the Juan Soto sweepstakes, depending what happens with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., they're either going to be all in or all out.
Yep.
And if they're somewhere in the middle, that's perplexing. But besides the point, if they end up being in a direction where they've got pieces to sell off, there are people in that Blue Jays bullpen they could move. There are position players that could be moved. A lot of guys in the outfield either on expiring contracts or contracts they would be willing to eat part of. I think the Blue Jays are certainly a team to say, hey, I know they did business for Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Who's to say you don't go back to the well? I think that's certainly in play.
Personally, I do not get why the Blue Jays don't just blow it up right now. I mean, you look at their roster. I mean, you've got a guy like Varsho whose value is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Right now, you've got Bichette and Vlad on the final year of their deals. You look around your division, you're not competing with the Yankees. The Red Sox are getting better. The Orioles are what they are. So, yeah, but, if you sign Soto, then throw everything out of the window, what I just said. Like, you're assuming that you're going to keep doing business. But the team I have circled is the only AL East team that I didn't mention there. That's Tampa Bay Rays.
Yeah.
The Rays are always open for business, right? I mean, you look at common trade partners, go to any team in baseball. The Rays are a common trade partner with them, typically. But this year, I think, is going to be such an interesting offseason for Tampa because of things out of their control. Their stadium was destroyed in the hurricane, and they're paying a big chunk of change to play in their rival's spring training facility all year. They're paying money to play in the Yankee spring training facility. So not
to mention they're building a new stadium.
They're building a new stadium. They're paying to play somewhere else. So you're paying money to play home games, and B, you're not making as much money from that. That's just it's a smaller seated park, and it's just this year just screams to me Tampa's gonna tear it all down. Because to be fair, no organization can get back to their peak faster than the Tampa Bay Rays.
Mm-hmm.
They can do that faster than even teams with the payrolls of like the Dodgers and the Yankees. Just the way the Rays have structured themselves, they can get to their ceiling is a lot lower than the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Mets because of those payroll restrictions. But no one can tear it down and get back to where they started faster than Tampa. It's a proven thing. So I just think that this year they're gonna punt, and it would make sense financially for a team that's limited. I mean, their highest investment can no longer like step foot in the United States as far as a player is concerned. And their other guys are kind of declining. They feel like they probably got the most use possible out of a Pete Fairbanks, out of a Yandy Diaz. And I just mentioned those two names. Both of those guys will look pretty good in black and gold, in my opinion. And I'm sure every other team in baseball is thinking the same thing. So the Rays are open for business, and it provides a unique opportunity for the Pirates, because normally when the Pirates are going to the trade table, most of the partners that they're working with know that they are at a financial disadvantage. They know that they have to move cash around to make this deal happen. The Pirates now have flipped that. They know that Tampa is desperate to get rid of money. And that's a unique spot for Cherington to be in, because during his time in Pittsburgh, he's pretty much done business under those circumstances. And while he's still doing it, I don't know if there's an organization more desperate to cut payroll right now than Tampa. Just based off of, and this isn't off of conversations I'm hearing from, people in front offices. This is just logic. Look at what's going on. Any owner in baseball would just view this year as like, hey, this is chalk it up to the hurricane. We can't compete under these conditions right now. So I just think the Rays are a perfect place to go shopping, but I think everyone else is thinking that too. But what does Tampa develop better than anyone, really? Starting pitching. So the Pirates are an attractive trade partner to them because they've got young pitching that can develop. They've had success in that area, getting young pitching and developing it from the Pirates in the past. I just think it makes way too much sense. So the Pirates should be looking at guys making, the higher end pay guys on the Rays right now. Take a look at them, because they're probably not going to be playing for Tampa Bay come, late March, early April. Andrew, anything to add on that?
No, just that I think it's, abundantly clear the AL East is where the Pirates are going. But
Yeah.
no, and I think even just to add another team, you could say the Baltimore Orioles would be another one of, hey, you have the surplus of pitching. The Orioles farm system has a supreme depth. They do not have nearly enough starting pitching depth in their farm system. And they have an excess of position players that they would be willing to move. So, I don't think that's such an unrealistic reality of, hey, one of the non-Red Sox Yankees teams in the AL East might be a really good trade partner for the Pirates. So I agree with you in that thinking. And I think that, maybe it won't be a splash move immediately at the winter meetings, but I think that when it comes to trades, that those are a couple of partners that we brought up that make, in my opinion, make a lot of logical sense.
All right, Andrew, give me your boldest prediction to come from the winter meetings as we wrap up the show.
Jeez, man. I will say boldest prediction: the Pirates trade Luis Ortiz for a couple of bullpen arms. How about that?
That is very bold.
I'm just shooting from the hip, man. I got nothing prepped on that one.
I'll say Bailey Falter for Yandy Diaz.
I like it.
Yeah.
I see it.
That would be. I mean, and again, that would complicate the Reynolds whole thing, but.
Yeah. Well, at that point, you're playing for offense. You're hoping to set a new club record.
You move a guy around. Yeah, we'll figure it out. But
yeah,
that's all we got. He's Andrew Destin. I'm Noah Hiles. You can follow us on our social media platforms. We're both on X and Blue Sky. You can read our work at post-gazette.com. You can keep tuning in. I'm sure we'll have a podcast or two next week from Dallas. We're gonna have a lot. We've been setting up meetings. It's gonna be a very busy next week here. We're really excited for it. You can follow it all at post-gazette.com, or you can keep tuning in to the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel and podcast network. Take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.